For 80 years, the United States has possessed a weapon more powerful than any nuclear bomb. It isn't a missile, and it isn't a fighter jet. It is a piece of green paper. The US dollar, being the issuer of the global reserve currency, is often called an exorbitant privilege. It allows America to borrow cheaply, spend endlessly, and sanction its enemies with the stroke of a pen. It is the ultimate status symbol of an empire. But what if I told you that this privilege is actually a trap? There is a paradox at the heart of the global financial system, a mathematical inevitability that has been quietly eating the American economy from the inside out for decades. It is the reason why your grandfather worked at a factory with a pension, but your son works at a coffee shop for tips. It is the reason why the Rust Belt exists. It is the reason why the greatest military power on earth can no longer manufacture its own ammunition without help from abroad. This is the story of the dollar's curse. To rule the world, America had to destroy its own economy, and now the bill is finally coming due. To understand why the system is breaking, we have to go back to when it was built. The year is 1944. The place is Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. As World War II creates rubble across Europe and Asia, the United States cements the dollar as the backbone of global trade. The world desperately needed dollars to buy oil, to trade goods, and to rebuild. America was happy to provide them, but there was a hidden cost that almost no one saw coming. In 1960, a Belgian economist named Robert Triffin stood before the U.S. Congress and delivered a warning that sounded crazy at the time. He described a fatal flaw in the system, a concept now known as the Triffin Dilemma. Here is the simple, terrifying logic he laid out. If the U.S. dollar is to be the world's money, the U.S. must supply the world with dollars. To supply the world with dollars, the U.S. must send more money out of the country than it takes in. This means the U.S. must run a trade deficit permanently. Think about that for a second. The U.S. stops running deficits, the world runs out of money, and global trade crashes. But if the U.S. keeps running deficits to satisfy the world, it eventually bankrupts itself. Triffin predicted that this system would inevitably force the U.S. to choose between two suicides: protecting the value of the dollar or protecting the American economy. You cannot do both. For 50 years, America chose the dollar, and the result is a tragedy in 3 acts. Act 1, the trap is set. In the 1950s, Made in America wasn't just a slogan. It was a reality. The U.S. produced 50% of the world's manufactured goods. Money flowed into the country. The middle class was built on manufacturing wages. But under the Triffin Dilemma, this couldn't last. The world was starving for dollars to facilitate trade, and America wasn't letting enough of them out. This created a global dollar shortage. To fix this, the U.S. began sending massive amounts of aid abroad, effectively subsidizing its future competitors just to keep the system lubricated. Act 2. The shift. By the 1970s, the mechanism clicked into gear. In 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. Why? Because the U.S. had printed too many paper dollars to cover its gold reserves. Once the gold anchor was gone, there was no limit to how much the U.S. could print, import. This is when we saw the rise of Germany and Japan. American consumers began exporting dollars and importing Volkswagens and Sonys. Politicians blamed lazy workers or bad management. They missed the point. The currency itself was the problem. Because the world needed dollars, the dollar remained artificially strong. A strong dollar made American exports expensive and foreign imports cheap. 'Twas a death sentence for American factories. Act 3. The hollow economy. Fast forward to the entry of China into the WTO in the early 2000s. This was the final nail in the coffin. We didn't just lose these jobs, we traded them. We traded our manufacturing base for the privilege of printing the world's money. While Wall Street boomed on financial flows, Main Street crumbled. The U.S. transformed from a nation that makes things into a nation that finances things. Just like Rome or the Spanish Empire before it, the U.S. accepted the luxury of cheap foreign goods in exchange for its own industrial soul. When you strip away the politics, this decay follows a strict mechanical pattern. It happens in 5 distinct stages, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Stage 1 is the liquidity demand. The world demands your currency for trade, forcing you to become the global banker. Stage 2 is the necessary deficit. To get that currency out, you become the consumer of last resort. You stop selling and start buying. Your trade balance turns red and stays red. Stage 3 is artificial strength. Because the world hoards your money, its value stays unnaturally high. This makes it mathematically impossible for your domestic factories to compete with foreign nations who manipulate their currencies lower. Stage 4 is de-industrialization. Factory owners realize they can't make a profit at home. They move production overseas. The domestic economy shifts from high-wage production to low-wage services and high-risk finance. Stage 5 is debt dependence. Now, you don't make anything. You have to borrow from the countries that do make things just to buy their products. You are now living entirely on credit. America has completed Stage 4. We are currently deep in Stage 5, and history shows there is no. Stage 6 is only a collapse. This brings us to the present day. The exorbitant privilege has become an exorbitant burden. The U.S. is currently running a trade deficit of nearly $1 trillion a year. We have a national debt spiraling past $35 trillion. Foreign nations hold trillions of these dollars, and they are starting to get nervous. This creates the ultimate catch-22 that keeps Federal Reserve Chairmen awake at night. You hear politicians from both parties promising to bring jobs back. They talk about tariffs, subsidies, and trade wars. But the structure of the reserve currency prevents it. It is a simple equation. You cannot have a strong global reserve dollar and a booming domestic manufacturing sector. You have to choose. If the U.S. tries to bring manufacturing back home really, bring it back, it needs a weaker dollar to make its goods competitive. But if the dollar weakens, foreign nations who hold trillions of U.S. debt will panic. They will sell. The value of the dollar will collapse, triggering hyperinflation at home. For 40 years, the U.S. chose the dollar. But now, the rest of the world is forcing a new choice. The rise of the BRICS nations and their accumulation of gold isn't just about hating America. It's about escaping the instability of the Triffin Dilemma. They know the U.S. must eventually debase its currency to pay its debts. And they don't want to be holding the bag when it happens. So, what happens next? If the pattern holds, we are approaching the Triffin breaking point. The U.S. economy is becoming too small to support the massive weight of the global financial system. The tail is wagging the dog. We are looking at 2 potential futures, and neither is painless. Scenario 1 is the deflationary crash. The U.S. tries to save the dollar status at all costs. It raises interest rates, cuts spending, and accepts a massive Great Depression to restore its balance sheet. This is politically impossible. No government survives this. Scenario 2 is the inflationary reset. The U.S. chooses to save the domestic economy. It prints money to pay the debt, devalues the dollar explicitly, and lets inflation rip to erode the real value of what it owes. This kills the dollar status as the sole reserve currency, but it might make American factories viable again. The scary part? We are currently drifting towards Scenario 2. The paradox is resolving itself. The U.S. is slowly realizing that being the world's bank is a curse, not a blessing. But shedding that curse will be painful. It means higher prices, lower consumption, and a complete restructuring of the American way of life. The era of cheap goods is over. The era of the king dollar is ending not because it was defeated by an enemy, but because it collapsed under its own weight. There is an old saying, be careful what you wish for. America wished to control the world's money. It got its wish, but in exchange, it sacrificed its ability to build, create, and produce. The curse of the reserve currency is that eventually you run out of other people's money to spend. And when the music stops, you realize you sold your chair a long time ago. Is the dollar's collapse inevitable, or can the U.S. engineer a soft landing? Let me know your theory in the comments below. If you want to understand the forces shaping your financial future, make sure you're subscribed to Economy Rewind. I'll see you in the next one.